Imagine this. You're at a concert of your all-time favorite band, and directly in front of the stage you see a group of photographers chasing musicians as they dance and jump around on the stage. How did these people get there? Who are they? In this episode of the Open Mic Podcast, I spoke with one of my favorite music photogs in Ohio, Chad Cochran. We delve into what makes photos art, stories that he had of musicians that he's worked with, and the preservation of moments. Here's our interview. I hope you enjoy. Chad, are you there, man?
I'm here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sitting down with me and joining the Open Mic Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm on, I think, day 2 or 3 after a 10-day trip to Japan, so I'm still battling jet lag a little bit.
Yeah.
but 13-hour difference is a little bit tricky to navigate, but I think I'm getting back to it. So I think hopefully after tonight I'll be back on schedule.
Is it like lunchtime when everyone else is sleeping then?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of the way that I always did it is, you know, I have a day job, and it was very odd being gone, realizing that when I was waking up in the morning, they were finishing their day the day before.
Right. Yeah.
So it was, and so it was not necessarily on purpose, but worked out incredibly well that I truly took a vacation, that I was geographically forced to unplug from my day job. So it worked out great. Well,
you didn't really unplug though, or I guess you were still doing stuff that you do for work. You were taking some really nice landscape looking photography. Tell me a little bit about the differences that you saw sort of aesthetically between America and Japan. I've personally never been.
Yeah, so, you know, I think that the way that I've kind of explained it to a few people, it's really been, on several levels, it's been perception versus reality. And, you know, my perception was, like, one of the things that I had seen in movies and had seen on TV and felt like it was one of those things that I absolutely needed to see under whatever circumstances it took me to actually get there. And I really wanted to see some temples. And so I thought, you know, I've always been fascinated by the way they look, and I wanted to make sure that I did whatever I needed to, you know, to make sure that I could see them. And the very first night in our hotel, when we were in Tokyo, we looked out the window, and I kind of chuckled, and I was like, well, it appears that there are 5 temples outside of our window that I can visibly see. So I don't think that they were, in my mind, I had created them to be this elusive, hard to find type of, you know, place. And by the time that I ended up spending some time, I believe it was in Kyoto. Kyoto has 1,600 temples in the actual city itself.
Wow. So I don't know how big Kyoto is, but does that mean they're pretty close together?
It was effortless to find them. It's really probably the easiest way to say it. It was kind of funny. I had to laugh to myself that I had created this complete, you know, the opposite of reality. Like, I had just completely made up this fantasy that it was going to be difficult to find, and it was going to be this, you know, almost Indiana Jones type thing where I was going to have to really just, you know, go out in the middle of nowhere and find these. And it was ridiculous. They were everywhere.
Well, that's awesome. Did you, so you shared a bunch of photos on your Instagram account, which is at Cowtownchad. And you were doing some things towards the end of your trip, or maybe once you got back home, where it looked like you had edited photos that you took in Japan and then in the background created sort of maps and created a bit of like collage-esque stuff, and I thought it was really cool. Tell me a little bit about how that idea came about.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I started something called you had mentioned the name of my account, and I go by Cowtown, as in the farm animal cow, Cowtownchad, because I spent about 15 years of my life living in Columbus, and as many people that live there realize that the Ohio State University used to be an agricultural school, and some people used to nickname it Cowtown. So
I didn't know that.
So I thought that would be a clever name. And then my social media following kind of took off, and so it was difficult when I relocated to Cleveland to change it. So it's just kind of stuck.
Right.
But I started a series a couple of years ago called, I just refer to it as the Cowtown Map series, I think is what I have it hashtagged on social media as. And I started doing some, rural Ohio has always been kind of my go-to and what I've kind of focused on when I first started, and I still go back to it today. And I just one day happened to be looking at vintage maps, and I was like, oh, I wonder what would happen if I took a couple of these photos and blended them with the vintage map. Like, what would that look like? And it turned out pretty cool. And so I started posting a handful of those, and I started getting requests for people to buy them. And I was like, oh, I guess that people kind of like that, that connection to a place or connection to a town or connection to a state. And
you let me know when you do some for St. Louis. I'll hit you up.
Yeah, it's true. Like, I started getting requests. People are like, oh, when can you come to Mississippi? And I was like, I don't think that I can sell enough of these for that to be completely fruitful to travel the country, just throwing an image and a map together. But
right.
it was great. I've been fortunate enough that I've traveled quite a bit. So I was able to do some of Hawaii and New York and Florida and several other states, and so I was able to appease some of the people that asked me for them, but certainly not all of them.
Sure. So you mentioned that you lived in Columbus for a little bit. Now you're living in Cleveland, where you are the Cleveland Scene magazine music photographer, correct?
Correct. I think that there are a handful of music photographers for Cleveland Scene.
Oh, okay.
Cleveland Scene is a pretty big publication. They get about 1 million website hits a month. I think they're somewhere in the 30,000 range on a weekly publication.
Okay.
So they have a lot of eyes. So they cover several events, everything from out and about town, specific events like beer festivals, street fairs, those types of things that are happening in communities. But they also do a pretty good job of covering music shows, and so they will do it a couple different ways. Sometimes they will go and they'll do a review of the show, and then other times we'll just because of the amount of shows that we get in, just in Cleveland itself. But they also cover, like you and I ran into each other and met in Mansfield. But I also cover a lot of the shows that happen in Akron as well. So plenty of shows to go around. And so we typically will do slideshows of those just to give people a taste of what was there and what they may have missed.
Sure. I'm not sure how your website's algorithm is set, but for the Richland Source website, every time we do a photo gallery, we get a ton of clicks that way, because usually people only have such a short attention span. They're not going to read more than 4 or 5 paragraphs, but they'll look through all the prom photos that we take of their children and stuff like that. So
yeah, and I find myself doing the same thing. Like, if
right.
I can't get to a show, I still want to know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I can completely agree with you that I do the same thing. I go on the website, click through, and see what I missed.
Cool. Well, so how did you get into photojournalism?
It was really a complete fluke. I mean, photography in general for me was a fluke. I'm a few years away from being 50 years old, and I didn't own a camera until I was 39.
Okay.
I think.
So there's room for me to improve.
It's funny. I have, several friends in the music industry, and one of them told me that he didn't write his first hit until I think he was 44 years old. And I was like, oh, that's how that works. You just keep at it and eventually something will happen.
Right.
So for me, it was, I think I've told this story several times, so I'll try to give the condensed version of it. But I really was doing fine doing, Ohio landscape photography. I grew up in a very rural town. I grew up in Fredericktown, Ohio, which is in Knox County.
Yeah.
Very small, probably only a couple thousand people live there now. And, their claim to fame has been they created the FFA jacket, and it's home to Luke Perry. I mean, that's kind of pretty much everything that we have.
Sure, but after this publishes, it'll be also the home of Cowtownchad.
I'm sure this will be the rocket ship that will take us.
I'm really hoping, man. I'm really hoping.
So I had been doing a lot of Ohio rural photography because that's kind of what I knew and what I was known for. And one day I got a message from Lydia Lovelace, who is a singer-songwriter that was based out of Columbus, and she asked if I ever had an interest in doing a photo shoot. Or I think she actually said, "Would you ever have an interest in putting any humans in your pictures?" And my knee-jerk reaction was, "No, I don't really think I want to do that." And it's not because anything against Lydia. It was photography had become an escape for me. It was how I got away. I would listen to music on the back roads and just kind of, get away from life for that, 1 or 2 hour block that I was able to do it. And I hadn't really ever done, I'd really never done any photography with people, and I had pretty, a low level of confidence because of my inexperience.
Sure.
And I went ahead and eventually said yes. And those photos turned out great. And she and I have gone on to do a couple photo shoots that have been absolutely fantastic. And then I ended up, one of my favorite stories is I went down to South Carolina, and because I'm also an artist. And so there's a woman I've become really good friends with who coincidentally also does a podcast. And she had invited me to come down and she sometimes does house shows at a one-room schoolhouse in South Carolina. And she goes, "We're going to have a musician down there, and he is going to play. And if you would like to set your artwork up and do that, that would be great." And I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, who's the musician?" She's like, "It's Caleb Cottle." And I was like, "Oh." She's like, "I would absolutely love to do that." I really enjoy Caleb's music and have been a fan of his for a very long time, and that would be cool. And so he and I messaged a little bit before that, and he said, "Hey, do you want to do some photos while I'm down here?" I was like, "I'd absolutely love to do that." So I get down there, and I've always been fascinated with music. It's always been, part of who I am. And as he and I were doing some photos, I had let him know that I was very interested in the business side of music. And I said, "Who's your manager?" And he goes, my manager's Andy Tennille." And I go, "Oh, okay." And I knew I'd heard the name, but it didn't really click at the time. And he goes, "Do you know Andy?" And I go, "I don't." I go, Can you tell me about him?" And he goes, "Sure. Andy is Tom Petty's tour photographer."
Wow.
And at that point, I can remember being immediately sick to my stomach and thinking, I'm not really sure why I'm currently here doing photos with you if your manager is Tom Petty's touring photographer. But as it turns out, those photos went incredibly well. Andy and I have actually messaged via social media quite a bit, and he turns out to be a fantastically gracious and nice guy. And Caleb has become a friend. He and his wife have spent the night here when they play in Cleveland, and we've gone on to do several photo sessions, and he's just a great guy, and I'm really glad that I've gotten to know he and his wife.
Yeah, that's super cool. So as we sort of already mentioned once, we met at Incarceration, which is, of course, the music festival that I'm hoping is going to become annual in Mansfield. and looking through your Instagram page and stuff like that, you've also taken sort of still portraits of musicians. What is your approach in going into both of those things, because they're very different, but you're still sort of capturing a moment? And how do you go about approaching that, and maybe even which type of photo session is your favorite of those types?
Yeah, so concert photography was second. Like I didn't do it right off the bat. Like I tried to do portrait stuff, and like even I talked about doing the first session with Lydia, and I did some portraits. They were okay, but I didn't really have any idea what I was doing. And I think that's what most of us, doing any type of art, that if we've never really done it, we're not super confident. We don't really like probably the first versions of what we do. And it took me some time. My portrait work now, I have a much higher level of confidence, and I really enjoy doing that. It's a little more intimate. It's I think what's probably one of the most important thing is just being able to have a conversation with someone and being, a decent human being, because if you're a complete fool, nobody's going to want to spend time with you anyway.
Right.
And I think that when you're doing photography, there's something that you have to be able to connect with who you're working with and get them to relax.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Yeah, and if they can't relax and they can't really kind of let you see who they truly are, then you're probably not in the right field.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing for even asking them questions. If you're writing a feature story and you're obviously like not paying attention, or you have no idea what you're supposed to be writing about, it definitely comes across in a negative way during the interview. And I feel like I personally try and just have conversations with people and not so much have interviews with people in that regard. I think that there's a lot of similarities in what you're saying and the what I consider to be the proper approach to doing what I do.
Absolutely. I think the key is being able to hold a conversation and not be robotic. And if you can make it feel natural, and if you not just make it feel natural, but if it can actually become a natural conversation, I think you're going to, like you said, you're probably going to get more out of that person as soon as their comfort level, they connect with you and you create a level of trust. No different than if you're holding a camera. So, there's very few people out there who absolutely love to get their photo taken. So you have to work with them a little bit to create that connection between the two of you. Then on the complete opposite end, like concert photography for me is more of a rush. It's like, probably the one thing that I was very guilty of in the very beginning is I didn't know how to use my camera very well when I first started overall. And I can remember one of my really good friends, she kind of looked at me, and I'll clean it up a little bit for the podcast, but she basically just said, you really need to learn how to use your camera. And, she was very blunt about it because I was asking a lot of questions, and she finally was just like, you really need to learn how to use your camera. And I did kind of a trial by fire. I went and shot a concert. And when I got home, I was like, oh, I took a lot of pictures, and there's about 9 that are probably usable. Like, they're just not very good, because I didn't know about, shutter speed or ISO or any of that stuff. I didn't know. And so now I find it to be a rush. When you go to do a show, you have, somewhere between 9 and 12 minutes tops for the band to play 3 songs. You have to be able to adjust through their movements. You have to be able to adjust through a stage height. You have to be able to adjust through lighting, fog, lasers, other people in the pit, the crowd, if they're right on, really right on you, if you're actually in the crowd, or if you're in a pit. There's just so many variables that to be a good concert photographer, you have to be a pretty good photographer, because you have to be able to know your camera. You have to be able to make on the fly adjustments with your camera to capture what's actually happening. And once you're able to do that, then, we'll go back to what you talked about is then you have to capture a moment. People aren't looking for just some guy sitting there on a stool playing his guitar or somebody with a mic in front of their face. You have to wait for the shot. You have to be able to see it. You have to be able to wait for things to happen. It certainly helps if you know the music, because you know when they're going to sing, when they may go to do a guitar solo, when they may have a little extra time to move around where they may not be right on the mic. And I don't think that it's effective to go in cold to most shows. I think it's more effective if you actually know the music, a little bit about the band, where they stand on stage, what kind of lighting they use. You just have to take a few extra steps to put yourself in a position to get good shots.
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely can say during incarceration, that was sort of my first time ever being a pit member of the professional photographer club, if you will. And I was definitely struggling with the first band. I know there was a band that we really enjoyed, the two of us, called, I believe it was 68.
Yeah.
And they were just incredible to photograph. Their lead singer was very energetic. He would throw his guitar up and down, and he did that several times, which was helpful because by the second time I realized he was doing it, and I sort of was
Yeah.
done with my oh my gosh, he's about to throw the guitar. What if it smashes? And I was like, oh, I have to shoot this. This is my job. And so it's funny because I think until you're sort of in the moment yourself, it's hard to really recognize the fact that you're no longer a spectator of really cool moments. You have to be the one to sort of capture this so that everyone who's looking at your site later is going to be able to see. And I think that takes time. And luckily for me, I was able to sort of get it by the time we saw Bush play.
Right. Yeah. I still find myself, I've shot hundreds of bands at this point. Maybe more than that at this point. And it's still I still catch myself sometimes, if I'm a huge fan of the band, that I'll realize that they're on their second song and I'm holding both of my cameras in my hands and I'm singing along to the songs, and I have to bring myself out of that moment and go, wait a minute, I'm here to do a job. I can go enjoy songs 4 through the encore. I've got to take photos the first 3. So
sure.
It's a fun position to be in.
Yeah, no, it was just I still sometimes just want to go back, and I'm so upset with myself that I didn't get a badge for all 3 days because I only had, I think, the middle day, that Saturday. But it was just incredible, and it honestly sort of changed everything for me in terms of photography, because I tend to take photos for general news because I'm a general assignment reporter who just very, very much loves music. And so, I go to football games and I capture those, and sometimes they come out okay, but I'm definitely not a grade A photographer. And so, after the second quarter, the lighting's no good and everything is blurry except for their helmet or something like that. And
right.
And it was just really cool to get to do that, and to sort of get to meet, you and the people from iHeartMedia in Cincinnati and all of that. And it was really cool to me, and this is sort of off topic, but it was really cool to me how, obviously, competitor's not really the right word, because I don't think Cleveland Scene has ever seen Richland Source as a competitor, but we're sort of fighting for the same audience in that one moment. But everyone was so cool. Everyone was so chill, and we were all really friendly. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in general news reporting, that never happens.
Yeah. So what's interesting is it's not always like that. In a photo pit. Periodically you'll get someone who just is pretty unprofessional, or I've been fortunate enough that I really haven't dealt with that. I'm a pretty big guy to begin with, so I don't get a lot of people tossing me around.
Okay.
But I've also, taking that completely out of the equation, I think it's no different than walking down the street. If you're not, if you're kind and cordial to someone and you use your manners and you say please and thank you, and when you're done taking photos in what may be a prime spot, if you're able to invite someone else to take that space, it just goes to show that it can happen. I mean, we still maybe only have that 9 to 10 minutes or whatever it is to get those first 3 songs. But I think once you've done it for a bit, there's just kind of some unwritten rules that people tend to usually follow and are really good about it. I've been very fortunate for the amount of time that I have done it, that I've only bumped into maybe a couple people that I would have preferred not to been in the pit with. But that's life, right? I mean, you're going to run into several people throughout your life that you're just going to prefer not to be around, and that's just kind of the way it works. So overall, it's typically a very good experience for me.
Sure. So that leads me to my next question, which is, the use of cell phones and how sometimes it seems like everyone has a camera that is also a phone more than a phone with a camera. How does someone whose job it is to take photos for a living compete with, Mary Beth and her Instagram account?
So, this is I don't know if it's hotly contested but this is a conversation I have had several times, and I may take a bit of a different view on this. If you are making art and you can create art on your phone and it works for you and it works for the person that you're taking the photo of or whatever it may be, and people enjoy it, then I don't really know that it matters if you're taking it on a $5,000 body with a $4,000 lens, or if you're taking it on your iPhone 8 or your iPhone 10 or whatever it is that has, a great camera on it also. There are obvious limitations by utilizing your phone that you can't do. You're never going to get a quality concert shot like you're going to with a nice lens and a nice body. But there are kind of the way I look at it, I kind of equate it back to Jack White. Jack used to, and probably still does, play those plastic Sears guitars. They don't stay in tune very well. They're hard to play, but I don't think that there's anybody that's heard a White Stripes song or any of his solo stuff that's going to say he's a crappy guitar player because the guitar he plays is not super expensive or super nice.
Yeah, I had no idea that he did that. That is really interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, I believe that he's playing some Eddie Van Halen guitars now on his new tour, but that traditionally he played kind of older, junkier guitars and still made fantastic music. So I believe that you can still make fantastic art with an iPhone or with a Galaxy or whatever it is, but there are limitations, no different than there are limitations with a huge camera. It's not as easy to transport. It's not as easy to get into certain spaces to do stuff. So the way that I look at it is I believe that you can make art with either. And as long as you are getting what you want out of it and the subject is also as long as you're getting what you want out of the subject and, on your lens, then I don't think it really matters.
It's funny to me that you keep referring to the photography that you do as art because, as I mentioned earlier, I take photos for Richland Source, albeit they're never going to be as good as yours. But I've never really considered it art so much as just like, oh, I have to take a photo for the story, so I got to point my camera and click. And obviously, being a photojournalist, you have a better eye and you probably think it through more. But it's just funny because I was actually speaking with one of my coworkers at lunch 2 days ago, and she told me that she also didn't really consider what she does photography wise for Richland Source as art. But I mean, what I'm trying to get at is you still make it art even though you're going to submit it for journalistic purposes, correct?
Yeah, I think then what you get back to is what's your definition of art,
Well,
right? I mean, I think that's kind of what it then becomes, and I think it's such a subjective word that people have various meanings. But if you go back and you think about, this is where I would struggle to think it's not art. If you go back and you look at journalistic photos, let's take, when the Kent State Massacre occurred, and there's the photo of the woman like over the body. That's art to me. That is capturing a moment, and it elicits some strong feelings. There's the woman in China, I believe, who is standing in front of the tank. That elicits a feeling for me. That feels like art to me. And I think there are several other photos that capture a moment in time. And although it may be photojournalism, I would struggle to think of it as anything other than art.
Yeah, okay. So I am in complete agreement with you, because now that you're mentioning all these different Pulitzer Prize winning photographs and stuff, I'm thinking of that one with that child in Africa who's clearly starving, and there's a vulture of some sort that's like just sort of waiting for him to die. And that creates the emotion of like, ultimate sympathy / how can I fly over there and help this poor child. And it invoked anger at the time that it was coming out, because I remember that I heard that, there were a lot of people who were mad at the photographer for not helping the child. And so, okay, you've won me over. It's art.
Yeah. So, I just, while we're talking, I looked it up. So the dictionary definition of art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as a painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. And I think that we just have concluded, based on those photos that we popped up in our head, they definitely elicit emotional power.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does a photographer like yourself in photojournalism sort of stand out then? If I mean, I realize that comparing art is never a great idea, but let's say that you're looking for a job or something. Like, what do you think makes a photo really great?
So it can be a couple of things. It can be aesthetics. So there may be something that you're like, you've taken a photo of somebody and the lights are perfect, and or maybe you're photographing a concert and they're shooting off like the smoke or the lasers or whatever, and you get it perfect. Or it's somebody raising their hand in the air, and it's just one of those moments that you capture. So there's the aesthetic component to it where it has to look good. But one thing I think that I'm trying to get better at is not just capturing what looks pretty, but really working on capturing moments. So it may not be something where, a singer is singing. It may be the one time the singer takes like a millisecond break and looks at the crowd and kind of smiles a little bit. That's the photo.
Yeah.
And like, for example, I went to Chinatown while I was in Japan, and I did some street photography, which is not something I do a lot of, but I love seeing people be people and just being human and in their element. And I think that of all the photos that I took in Japan, the I don't know, 2 or 3 hours that I spent in Chinatown, I probably have some of my best photos, and they're of people just being people. So I think there's something about capturing an emotion or capturing um, capturing some feeling and not just always going for the aesthetics of this looks pretty.
Certainly, yeah, absolutely. I sort of lost what I was thinking of because I was just sort of listening to you, thinking about photos that I've taken before that I thought were really good. But I think you're right. I also think that comes down to a little bit of luck, right? Like,
Absolutely.
like you could take 1,000 photos, but if they're not going to smile at the crowd, you may not get to capture the moment. All you get are him looking at his fretboard on his guitar.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I have shot several bands that I'll walk away after the second song because I'm like, okay, they're not going to do anything. They don't, and that's not to take anything away from their music. It's how can I, am I going to catch a moment for somebody who is maybe a relaxed performer or, not high energy? Probably not, and I can't, if they're not going to put in the effort, I can't, there's no way to fake that. There's no way to be able to provide images of somebody doing something they didn't do. So, but you're right. It's also, I've also shot several shows where I've got packed into a pit and I am dead on with the lead singer and he doesn't move behind his mic stand the entire time. Or he is stuck behind his mic stand the entire time. So the answer is yes. A little bit of luck certainly helps, but I also think, for those few minutes that you're there, trying to keep your antennas up and being, a high sense of awareness the entire time also is hugely beneficial.
You know what's interesting, and this is just me sort of thinking through what you and I witnessed at the incarceration on Saturday, was in my head, the bands that have maybe let me start over. The bands with the best stage presence ought to be the biggest bands like Bush, because they're the most popular. They've probably had the most experience in front of big bands. There's less to be nervous about, or maybe, or I guess something like that. But what was really interesting to me is that, again, I think 68 was probably the best band for stage performance as well, because there were only two guys and they faced each other during their entire set, the drummer and the guitarist and lead singer. But they just had so much fun, and you could tell they were so into what they were doing. And then you got to Our Lady Peace, who didn't do anything interesting at all, and I did watch you walk away after 2 songs.
Yeah, and what's bad is Our Lady Peace has had several hits.
Right.
They're just more straight ahead performers. They get up, they play the songs. People certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but
right.
I, in my opinion, as a fan, if I'm going to pay however much money people paid for those tickets, and they're just going to see them do nothing visually, I may as well have stayed home and listened to them on my iPod.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And what's interesting is, we've brought up 68 a few times, and they were hands down, I think I may have said it to you or whoever would listen to me. I just said, I just found my new favorite band.
Yeah.
I mean, they were great. They had a great stage presence, but I also did a little bit of not fact checking, but history with them, and found out that Josh Scoggin, who is their guitarist and vocalist, has been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
He's played with The Chariot and several other bands. And so he has been around a very long time. And my understanding is that has been a consistent, with him throughout. He's always been a high intensity performer. People were telling me stories oh, you've got to get on YouTube and look up these videos where they played a house show and they basically tore the house apart. And I'm like, well, I absolutely want to see that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm looking for. But I don't disagree with you. So people certainly have different ways that they approach things. I mean, if you look at Suicidal Tendencies, they played Mike has to be the same age as me or a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't stop. He was like the most high energy guy the entire time and was completely entertaining to photograph. So I'm with you. You can't control, and you certainly, that's nothing I would ever want any part of, is to be able to control how people perform, because people, that's kind of what they do. But I can tell you that it is more entertaining and it is more pleasurable to take photos of people that are doing something fun and actually look like they're enjoying themselves on stage, as opposed to those that look like they're just waiting to get off the stage.
Well, right. And I mean, I think that's what journalism is, right? We're not really supposed to be the ones who are dictating how news happens. We just simply have to be there to capture the moment, whether it's through photos or through a written article.
Right.
So speaking of journalism, how has photojournalism changed since you began it?
You know, it's, I'm not a very good resource for this because I really haven't done it for very long. You know,
How long have you done it?
I think I've only done this now for, I got a camera when I was 39.
Oh, okay.
And I'm currently 46. So really only like 7 years. And I spent the majority of my first several years doing very traditional landscape photography. I didn't really do anything else, and did a lot of art shows. And then I started working with woods and mixed media, and I would create structures around my photos, kind of to frame them in. And I think I've done over 60 art shows now. And I didn't really start the music side of it until 4 or 5 years ago. So it's, I don't know that I'm a great resource to give a really good background on how it's changed. So I guess I'll punt on that question.
No worries. Do you have any, can you tell me any cool stories that you have about musicians that you photographed?
Let me think. So I've had a few really cool things happen. I've been incredibly fortunate. And so the downside of you asking me this question is there's no doubt that I'm going to forget like 18 cool stories that happened to me, and I'm only going to give you a couple of them.
That's
but I, when I was a little bit younger, I used to listen to a band called the Civil Wars quite a bit.
Yep, I'm familiar.
And John Paul White has gone on to put out solo records, which are also fantastic. And the last podcast that I did, when they were advertising for that podcast, they talked a lot about the fact that I do music portraits, and and that I live in Cleveland. And I posted that on Twitter, and John Paul replied back and said, "Yeah, I went in."
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh." And so he and I have a mutual friend. So I texted my buddy and I said, "So does John Paul run his own Twitter page, or is that like a manager or somebody that's doing that, or a social media person?" He's like, "Oh no, it's him." And I go, "Okay."
Wow.
And it turned out that that I was able to do, when he played the Music Box Supper Club here in town, we spent maybe 10 or 15 minutes together doing a photo shoot, and some of them turned out amazingly well, some of them didn't, but I'm incredibly, it was cool to be able to hang out with him. We have a ton of mutual friends, and that turned out neat, because he lives in the Muscle Shoals area of Alabama, which is if you haven't watched the show called Muscle Shoals, you absolutely should. There's just such a great musical history in that area. And I've been very, very fortunate to meet several musicians and bands from there, and worked with them. And then there's, to come back to other cool stories, I paused in telling the story, but it was kind of a cool moment, because I've been a fan for a long time. But Lydia Lovelace, back to her, there was last year, Jason Isbell always plays a string of shows at the Ryman Auditorium. And he played, I think last year was the year that he played 6 shows with like a 1-date break between. They played 3 shows off a day and then played 3 more shows. And it just so happened that my wife and I had bought tickets to go to Nashville and see him play on the Saturday night. On the Saturday night, it just so happened that he had picked 6 female artists to open up all of the shows, and Saturday night opener was Lydia.
Huh.
So it worked out incredibly well. And I texted her and I said, hey, I'm going to be in Nashville for the concert. Would you have any interest in me doing photos? And I think she initially must have been getting bombarded with requests, and she's like, I don't think I can get you tickets. And I was like, no, I have tickets. I'm like, I want to do photos. Like, I have tickets. I want to come do photos. So I got to spend a lot of time backstage with her and the band for their very first Ryman Auditorium show, which was, it's the original Grand Ole Opry. And so that was such a cool moment. And Jason Isbell's another one of those guys that I don't really know personally, but we have a bunch of mutual friends, and he's been a follower of mine on Instagram for a long time. And I was backstage and he was coming off, Lydia was getting ready to go on to do sound check, and they were both standing there. And I said, hey, would it be cool if I got a photo of you 2 together before you went on? And put my hand out and said, hey, I'm Chad Cochran. And Jason paused for a second and he looks at me and he goes, you take real pretty pictures.
Wow, well, there you
go. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I was like, he and I have kind of crossed paths a handful of times, but never really spent any time together. But it's I would be an absolute liar, as would anybody else that is a musician or an artist, to get some acknowledgement that what you're doing out there is good and people enjoy it and people like seeing it.
Yeah.
And
that's the sort of thing you want on your tombstone.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those cool moments where I was like, you know what? That's it. It was incredibly brief. And I was like, I'm okay. Like I was able to, I do a terrible job of taking compliments. And that one I was able to say, thank you. And it stuck with me. It was a cool moment.
Very cool. Very cool. Any others?
I'm
I'm really enjoying hearing these things. You're not bothering any of the listeners at all. I promise.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anybody. Who else?
Well, I want to know about the photos on your Instagram account with the Avett Brothers, because that is my favorite band in the whole wide universe.
Okay, so I'll do the Avett Brothers, and then I'll also talk about when I had the opportunity to spend a little time with Peggy Young,
okay,
who is Neil Young's ex-wife.
Sure.
So the Avett Brothers thing was kind of just I was photographing the High Water Festival down in the Carolinas, and that just turned out to be a great. I will, it's only been on for 2 years, and I really, really hope that my schedule aligns that I can go back this year. I wasn't able to go last year, but I was able to go to the inaugural one, and the Avetts headlined one night, and you talk about being lucky. I was just lucky. I don't know them at all. I'm certain they don't know me, but I just was able to get some really cool shots, and they used a couple of them on their social media. So it was one of those, it was perfect lighting, awesome festival, wasn't an incredibly packed, miserable pit where you have too many people. And so that one was really that was a fortunate thing. I was able to grab a couple great pictures and felt really good about it.
Yeah, the one that I love specifically is the one that you actually sort of told me about, the one where I believe it's Scott Avett, although I don't
I
want to.
think so.
And he's playing he's sitting down, I think, or he's wearing a hat. And you had told me he had just had, I think, cancer removed from his nose.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I always hate to say yes or no that that's the case, but I'm pretty sure that he had been treated for some type of cancerous cells on his nose.
Sure.
And if I'm incorrect about that, I certainly don't mean any harm. But
there was some surgical or something that happened to his nose that they were trying to avoid people knowing about.
Well, and I don't even think that was so much that they were trying to have people not know about, but I can definitely assure you that they were using very strong top lights.
Okay.
So it was like can lights coming straight down, and he, like a lot of people, was wearing like a short brim hat.
Right.
And he was playing the banjo, and it just turned out that I caught a shot of him where he was wearing a black shirt. And I do a lot of black and white photography for my live music. And it just turned out that the way that the shadows hit, it picked up his hat and it didn't cast any light onto his face. So it looks like his hat is floating and his arms, everything else is completely black, except you can see his arms perfectly in the banjo, and his hat just looks like it's floating in the air, but there's no face or upper torso because he's wearing a black shirt.
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable photo. It's really cool because like you sort of have to know who you're looking at. But and then like when you told me, oh yeah, that's the Avett Brothers, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see that.
Right.
No, yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah.
So your black and white photography is really cool to me. My editor has personally told me, and I hope he doesn't listen to this episode, that he doesn't like black and white photography because it quote unquote makes it all look old. I'm a big fan of black and white photography. I think it makes sort of like facial expressions or lines on your face or lines and structures. I think it just makes everything sort of stand out a little bit more. Talk to me about why you love black and white photography so much.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is I if anybody looked at my aesthetic and what I'm used to photographing, I don't think anybody would argue that I like the way things look when they're old. So that would probably not be the best. That would not be like the best convincing argument for me, because I would say, well, of course it does. That's
gotcha.
That's what I'm doing.
All right, Larry, you can listen to this conversation again.
But for me, black and white photography is kind of it's. I mean, this goes way back to when I was in college, and I can remember like finding out who Ansel Adams was for the first time and seeing some of those photos. And I think that a lot of his photos, if you look at them, I think it's the black and white ones that you remember him for. And those are the ones that really stick out. And for me, with black and white concert photography, I kind of go back and forth. Like I would say I'm closer to 50-50 now because I've shot some other bands. But when I first started, I shot so many Americana type bands where it was mostly a guy with an acoustic guitar, or they may be standing or sitting. And it felt more rich to me. It felt right to me. Like I guess I never intentionally make a photo. I never take a photo and go, I'm going to do that in black and white. Or I don't ever take a photo and say that's going to be in color. For me, it's about what I feel best represents the moment and best represents what I'm trying to deliver to people's eyes. So I don't want to say that I'm, completely enamored with black and white photography, and I don't want to say that I'm not. I think for me, I do like black and white photography. I'm trying to avoid this conversation because I'm trying not to say exactly what you said your editor talks about it being old, is that I'll take a different approach. Instead of saying that I think that it makes the photo look old, I would prefer to say I think it makes the photo look timeless.
Okay, I like that. I'll say that to him next time.
Yeah. So I like that. I like to see, those old rock photos that are in black and white. And I even like the photos that are, if you look at the photos that we produce now that are all crisp and clean and nice and sharp. I'm trying to do a better job of not having every one of my photos be like that. I'm trying to incorporate more movement into my photos. And I see, I'm a huge fan of Danny Clinch, and and several other photographers who a lot of them still shoot with film. They capture, those guys are probably out doing the best job of capturing moments instead of capturing a concert. They have decided to utilize the movement that's in their photos, and they've become known for that. And they also shoot a lot in black. There's a lot of black and white photos, and that's why I bring that up, because a lot of the guys that have been around doing it for a very long time, that was the option. The black and white was the norm. And I like that timeless feel. I'd like to be able to say, how would this photo line up if it were, I think I shared a Pete Townsend photo today on Twitter. Like, how would that look, against that? Like, does it add up? Does it give the same feel? And do I feel good about it?
Cool. So go with me here on this question.
Okay.
When I shoot basketball, or I shoot football, or I shoot, baseball, I'm anticipating how I know where to point my camera, and I know how the ball is going to come off the bat, or I know how the ball is going to look as it's being shot from a hand from a basketball player, or thrown from a quarterback, or caught. What is your favorite genre to shoot, and does it take a while for you to sort of get used to how a punk show might look as opposed to a folk music show?
Absolutely. I think that I've told every one of my friends who are singer-songwriters, I'm like, listen, I love you guys, and I'll buy your records and your T-shirts, and you're always welcome to spend the night with me. But there's only so many photos I can take of people sitting down playing an acoustic guitar,
Sure,
where I feel like I'm really capturing a moment. But I think what really helps is, well, there's two parts of it. It's exciting to watch a band for the first time and try to anticipate what's going to happen. But I think that some of the shows that I've shot the best are bands that I've seen 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, where I kind of get it now. I understand what they do. I understand who they are. I have a general feeling of what they're going to do. If they play a song that I know, I sometimes know how they're going to deliver it, and I can anticipate some things like, that everybody seems to be really into jumps, like capturing a jump. Like if somebody jumps up in the air, a lot of photographers are like, oh, did you get the guy when he jumped?
right.
And I think that's cool too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that's cool too. But there's also, I think when you're part of a concert, and you're part of that event, and you're letting their blood run through yours, no different than their blood's running through the crowd. Like if you're part of that moment, you can sense and feel kind of what they're going to do. And if you can, if you just stay in the moment, and you just stay as part of the event, and I think you open yourself up. You create like some new senses, like where you can truly try to capture things that are anticipatory. You can start to feel what the band's doing. You can feel, crescendos. You can feel breaks and those types of things, and you get to capture some cool stuff in those moments.
Fantastic. I'm sort of running out of questions to ask you. Do you have anything that you were hoping that we would talk about?
I don't think so. I think this has been absolutely fantastic. I didn't really have any preconceived notions, so I was just going to roll with it, and I think it's going great.
Did you not know that I was a great great interviewer? Like, you're a great photographer?
That one I actually had listened to a couple of your interviews, so I just want to make sure that you weren't going to drop something on me that you do like in all of your interviews that maybe I wasn't going to be prepared for. So I did my homework for you.
I'm not sure that I've ever dropped anything. I don't know what you're talking about.
just making sure. Like, I know that there's like some people that do podcasts and interviews that they always, like, as part of it, they'll always ask, like, they'll go through like a mid part where they ask like 2 or 3 of the same exact questions to all of their people. I just wanted to make sure that if you had one of those,
I've thought about doing that, but I'm sort of waiting for someone to like give me a sponsorship so that I can be like, this is the Chrysler dealership story of the week. Tell me your favorite story that happened or something, But right. No, unfortunately.
Let's hear about the first Chrysler that you rode in.
Unfortunately, no car dealership has reached out to me. Shockingly.
It's still early.
Yeah,
early.
We're still within like 33 episodes, so we'll get there eventually for sure.
Excellent.
Well, Chad, thank you so much for talking to me, man. I really appreciate it, and I sincerely hope that you had a great time. I would love to have you back. What are some of the shows that you're shooting coming up?
Let's see. I have Sunbolt tomorrow night, which is Jay Farrar, who was one of the original members of Uncle Tupelo. So that takes me way back to when I first started getting into American and Americana music. And then I think I'll tie it in with the Avetts. I think the next thing I'm doing is I believe, as of right now, that I'll be photographing the Nkaya Festival that's going to be in downtown Cleveland for Cleveland Scene.
Yes, I tried to get a press pass for that, and I have sent 3 emails, none of which have been returned, so I'm not entirely sure that I have the press credentials to that show. I'm a little bummed. Yes, but that's okay.
Some of those shows are pretty locked down, so I'm still don't have 100% confirmation that I'm going to be there either.
Oh yeah.
But as far as I know, I believe that is my next scheduled event.
Okay, well, great. Well, I will live vicariously through your Instagram feed then.
Excellent. No, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. I hope you come down to Mansfield sometime. We'll get a beer.
That sounds great. All right, take it easy.
Take it easy yourself. Bye.
All right, we'll see you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's open mic episode. For more music journalism by me, follow me at nojo15 on Twitter, or check out the Richland Source Instagram account at Newsroom After Hours. Chad Cochran's social media accounts are all at Cowtownchad. I highly recommend looking at his work. We'll be back next Wednesday. Thanks again for listening.
They say